Hello everybody, my name is James Davies and welcome to Photo Chat Vlog on YouTube. Now in the last episode, Season 3, Episode 9, I spoke about using a Yashica Samurai half-frame camera with expired film. And in this episode, I wanted to follow up with some other half-frame experiments with my Fuji TW-3. Now this is an interesting camera, because first of all it's a Fuji camera. Now normally traditional cameras made by Fuji are called Fujica, certainly the SLRs are. And this is not. But I got this one in Japan when I went on a trip there a few years ago, so maybe it's something to do with the Japanese market. Now whilst I was out there, I did a search for cameras that you absolutely could get in Japan, but that you might find difficult to get in Europe, and this was one of them. When we went in some camera shops, my friends were generous enough to allow me that indulgent time to look around, and I saw this one, and I had to have it. So from what I know about it, it was apparently designed for one-handed operation. Perhaps when you're on a climbing trip or something like that. So like the Samurai, it's all automatic, but it is true, I can work the camera with just one hand. It's also got a really weird design in that it either has a telephoto lens or a wide-angle lens, selected by rotating the front of the camera. It doesn't seem to have a normal lens. And like the Samurai, it also loads the film vertically, so that its natural mode is horizontal, and it can also do the burst mode thing. Now one sad thing about this camera is it is as leaky as an old tin bath, which I learned the hard way through various rolls of film going into it and coming out with light leaks all over the pictures. It wasn't the kind of camera where the light leaks even had any kind of charm to them. It was just annoying. But I am happy to report that after I taped it up all over the place, it no longer seems too bad in terms of the light leaks. So I'm really glad that black electrical tape seems to have saved the day. Now one final thing, the difference in size between the TW-3 and the Samurai is quite significant. The Samurai is a heavy, bulky thing by comparison, and the TW-3 is a genuine shirt pocket camera. Is one better than the other? Well, yes, actually I think the Samurai is better. Or at least I do today, since my opinion changes all the time. But that doesn't mean I don't like the TW-3. Now the pictures I'm going to show you today were taken this year with the TW-3, and like the ones taken with the Samurai, they were all taken using expired film. Fujicolor Superior Extra 400 ASA film in this case. I'm not sure when it expired, but it was on sale for $1 when I got it, and nothing else in that batch was much less than about 10 years old. So the cool thing about half-frame cameras from my point of view is if you've got a bunch of 24 exposure films like I have, then there's more incentive to use them with a half-frame camera. Basically, it's a bit of a drag shooting 24 exposure films these days when most processors charge the same for processing and scanning a 24 exposure film as they do a 36 exposure one. It doesn't really make it very cost effective to shoot 24 exposure film. But in a half-frame camera with 24 exposure film, you get approximately 48 shots per roll. And I had some interesting old expired films, and so I thought I'm going to put these in my half-frame cameras this summer and have some fun. You tend to be sparing when shooting with a film camera, certainly in comparison to a digital camera where you can take 10 shots of the same thing and go home and choose one of them that you like. Now I always try and take 1 or 2 shots of maximum of anything, because I want to make the most of my films. But with double the shots on half frame, you do have plenty to play with. So what we'll see in this episode are collages, or photomontages, or joiners as they're sometimes known. This is where you take a set of overlapping images, and after they're developed and scanned, you join them together into one bigger image. The 3 that I'm going to show you this time are not the most successful, to be honest, but they're a good example of the art of the joiner, and even though they're not the most successful pictures, I still kind of like them. Now what you're seeing whizzing by at the moment is the collection of images that make up the first photo montage. When they're all put together, they look like this, which is a staircase in the building where I currently work. Now this was shot really quickly about a month or 2 ago, just before popping out for my lunch break, and I joined everything together in my computer using Google's Picasa a couple of weeks ago. As I mentioned, the TW-3 was very leaky, and I taped up the camera the night before, and this was me giving this camera one last chance to basically see if it was any good. So I taped it up all around, all over the seams, and all over the back window and everything like that, and I just decided to shoot. As a photo montage or joiner, this definitely shows you what the camera was thinking in terms of exposure when it was pointed in different areas, and what bits of the building it was trying to represent. Although it doesn't look particularly cohesive as an image of a staircase, let's ponder on what we can surmise about this particular staircase anyway. It has some railings. It has the horizontal treads of the stairs. It has shadows coming in through the windows. And it has the windows themselves, which have got a horizontal and a vertical thing going on. There's a lot of information in this scene that your eyes would be processing as you navigate going up and down these stairs. And I think that this image, although it's kind of chaotic and random, is actually pretty good. It's a question of perception, and I don't think I could have captured that essence of a stairwell in quite the same way with just one image. So doing it this way allows you to get a wider angle view, as well as a very artistic rendering. The different exposures and angles come together in a way to render, rather than represent the whole scene. For example, if you can spot the light fitting on the left, the circular light that's fixed on the wall, if you then cast your eye down the wall, you can see how the top part of the banister is continuous on that photograph with the ones beneath it, but the vertical rails don't match up at all, and yet you can decode it visually. Now there is the paradox of the photomontage, but more of that later. Now the next photomontage is quite simple, as it's only using 4 images. This was done on the same lunch break when I had come out of my building and was walking around, and I was using the portrait orientation of the camera. Now what we get is an image of a street with some buildings on it, but made up of 4 distinct images. Each of them, for whatever reason, is actually exposed quite differently by the camera and the film. So the one on the far left has got this great big plume of sun, and you can see it features a building and some foliage. The next one to it has got a murky, polluted water feel to it. It's rather green, and the contrast is poor. The one next to that doesn't look too bad, but it's still a little bit murky. And then the final one on the right looks absolutely perfectly exposed. I don't know why this collection of images turned out this way. Although it's expired film, it's normal, regular, colour negative film. So I don't know whether there was some variation in the film itself just because of the way it was stored, or whether the camera was changing the exposure with each shot. I guess this is what happens if your picture isn't perfectly exposed in this camera on this old expired film. Now I'm not actually that impressed with this picture. It proves a point, and it demonstrates the art of photomontage and the action of doing it, but it doesn't exactly set the world alive. It has a certain feeling to it, but what I will say is that it doesn't really convey that scene to me particularly well. I'm very familiar with that scene. In fact, I used to work in the building on the right, and I used to look out of those rows of windows because I didn't really like working there. But that's another story. Nevertheless, we have it. We have a photomontage, a simple one made of 4 images, very linear, each image following each other, unlike the previous one. Or indeed, this one. Now these images were all taken from the roof terrace of the Westgate shopping centre in Oxford, and when they're all put together, it should be a panorama of Oxford. The really interesting thing about this was that before the new Westgate shopping centre was built, you couldn't see this view unless you were in a crane or something like that. I mean, maybe you might have been able to see it if you worked in the old Westgate in the offices or something like that, but so much space was cleared to build the new Westgate that this was really a view that the average citizen of Oxford didn't see until very recently. So I thought it'd be interesting to try and make a photo montage out of it, but when I put all the pictures together, well, I don't really know. It's kind of successful, but it doesn't look like I thought it would. You can hopefully see that the different pictures are stacked up on top of each other so that they all form part of a larger whole. So this particular picture on its own is not very interesting, but when you put it together with all the other ones, you get a representation of the scene photographically, as one but made up of many. I guess it gives an impression, particularly if you look at the railing at the bottom, of just how much a camera lens distorts an image, and also that you have to actually physically move your camera around, and that each movement renders each new image very differently from the one before. It's an interesting thing because our eyes are so fast at reacting to moving your head around, or moving your body around, or focusing on something in the distance, or something close up, that we don't realise that the scene, as framed by our eyes, is changing all the time. I think when you try the photo montage thing, it illustrates that actually depending on where you stood, and depending on what you're looking at, that it all becomes a matter of perception. And what struck me about this one was in fact that some of the images were almost completely overlapping each other. I chose to include them all, but I must have got it wrong in the mapping of it, as it were. So of all the images of all the photomontages today, I like this one of the staircase the most. I'm not going to say it's the most successful. I don't really know what to say about it other than it's a way of rendering that staircase scene, which is a staircase that I use every day that I'm at work, in a building that I'm very fond of. It's also a different and creative way of using a camera, and a fun way to shoot with the half-frame format. So these are the pictures that I took with the Fuji TW-3 and made into collages. And like I say, it was an experiment to see if that camera behaved itself when it was taped up. And it did. So I'm going to dig out more 24 exposure films and shoot more with that camera next year. Now this brings us to the end of Season 3 of Photo Chat Vlog, the end of 2019, and in fact, the end of the decade. Now who knows what the next decade will bring? I'm not sure, but I hope it's good. Take care.